This is the VelocityOne flight deck by Turtle Beach. It's a side stick and throttle for PC flight simulators that comes with lots of awesome features. In this video, we'll talk about what the flight deck has to offer and my general opinion on it. But before that, I would like to thank Turtle Beach for sending me the flight deck for this video. While I did receive the product for free, my opinions on it are still my own. So with that being said, let's check the VelocityOne flight deck out. So this is how the side stick comes out of the box. It's very easy to attach and remove from the base, which is neat if you want to store it somewhere without much space. Let's begin with the actual side stick itself. It has the two obvious axes for pitch and roll, but it also comes with a twist axis for your rudder or tiller. The movements feel very nice and smooth and reflect accurately within the simulator. You're also able to adjust the height of the side stick, which is a nice additional feature. One thing that does bother me though is that as far as I'm aware, there's no way to make the side stick left-handed. I use it to fly airliners, in which I usually sit in the captain's seat, so it makes sense to use it with my left hand. And while it definitely is possible to use it left-handed, the comfort aspect isn't as good. If you look at the top of the side stick, you'll see a small screen, which can be used to show certain parameters of your choice. You can customize this screen via an application, which we'll look at later in the video. Below the screen are two hat switches, as well as a joystick, which also works as a button if you push it down. A very interesting feature is the button below also works as a trackpad when you push this switch up. I personally haven't found it more practical than using a mouse, but for some setups it could be quite useful if the mouse is far away. Under the trackpad is a scroll wheel, which also works as a button, as well as another hat switch on its left, which can be used to control the chrono on the screen. Behind the throttle are two triggers with a very satisfying click. Let's now have a look at the base of the side stick. My favorite feature is definitely the landing gear. It resembles the look of a gear lever on many airplanes, and it's really fun to use. Below the gear are three switches. They all have two positions, but the left and right ones spring back into the center position after each input, while the middle one remains in place. On the right side, we've got a 3-position rotary switch, as well as a bunch of buttons below it and a few more in the middle. The last thing I'd like to mention on the side stick is that it comes with a headphone jack for anyone who might find that useful. Now that we've seen the side stick, let's move on to the throttle. You get two independent throttle levers which can be connected into one by pushing a button on the side. I absolutely love the way the throttles feel. They're extremely smooth and quite heavy, allowing me to make precise adjustments. And just like the side stick, the throttle is also packed with buttons and switches. At the back of the throttle are two switches which have two positions. I personally use them for reverse thrust, which works really neatly with them. Beside those switches is a scroll wheel, a hat switch, and a button which I use for toga. The right side of the throttle is also full of controls. Firstly, there's another scroll wheel around a joystick, which again is a button too, as well as yet another hat switch, 3 buttons, and a switch with 3 positions. There's so many hat switches, buttons, and scroll wheels that I honestly don't even know what to assign to all of them. But I love having more than I need, so I can always add more to it in the future without worrying about having enough assignable buttons. On the base of the throttle, you'll find what looks to be a flap lever, but I prefer just using it for the speed brakes since it only has 2 physical detents at the start and end of the lever. On the right side of the base is a big red button with a satisfying click, as well as 3 dials below that. These dials all work as buttons too, and the top one is actually 2 dials on top of each other. I love these dials a lot as there are loads of ways they're used in real cockpits. I have the top one set for my nav radio and the middle one for my altimeter. The one thing I don't quite like is they don't seem to work greatly in X-Plane, as you can't just make one smooth continuous turn. Instead, you have to turn and stop many times, otherwise the dial in X-Plane just stays still. I'm not sure if this is an issue on other flight simulators too. If anyone has a solution for it, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Now that we've looked at all the physical buttons and switches, it's time to have a look at the screen below the throttle. This screen can be used to configure your throttle, as well as to provide more digital buttons, switches, and dials. The main thing that you can customize on it are the haptic detents and the lighting. We'll have a look at the lighting within the app later, so let me quickly show you the haptic detents. The detents page allows you to set up to 3 detents in the throttle at positions of your choice. Now they're actually haptic detents and not physical ones, which basically means that the detents cause a small vibration in the handle or base of the throttle, which can be chosen in the same page. I think this idea is extremely unique, however, since they're just haptics, I feel like I often overshoot the detent before I notice that there was one. Nonetheless, it's something very innovative on Turtle Beach's end. The last thing I would like to mention regarding the hardware is how the flight deck can be mounted for your setup. The bases are really heavy and come with rubber feet, which are very effective. Unless you move the throttle to full power very quickly, there is no way you'll get either the side stick or the throttle moving around on your desk. For people who want a more permanent setup, the side stick and throttle come with screws as well as pre-made holes to install them onto a fixed setup. With the hardware out of the way, let's look at the software for the flight deck, as it plays a huge part in customizing your device. The software comes with the obvious basic features to update firmware and test the hardware, but additionally to that, it also allows you to customize the RGB backlighting to a color of your choice. However, the main thing the app is for is to customize your screens on both the side stick and especially the throttle. The screens have 3 themes, one for combat aircraft, one for spacecraft, and one for commercial airliners. The very interesting part is that you're actually able to choose exactly what type of buttons and switches you'd like on the screens, as well as the text on the buttons. You can customize up to 3 panels for different phases of flight. And if you don't feel like setting it up yourself, the software comes with 3 presets that match the 3 themes and show relevant switches and labels. When it comes to the actual display itself, it's sharp in quality but slightly laggy, however that's not that big of a deal considering what it's used for. While I find the whole idea of having digital buttons and switches very unique and intriguing, I'm not sure I'll actually use them, as the buttons basically just act as a keyboard. So for example, when you press this button, it just inputs a number 1 as if you pressed it on your keyboard. As far as I'm aware, you cannot change the input that it makes, so you just have to drag the switch or button onto the key of your choice, which isn't very practical for me since I would still like to keep my keyboard for other bindings in X-Plane. It could be that I'm just missing something, but for now it seems like that's a limitation to be aware of. That being said, it does seem like something that could be updated with software, so maybe we'll see an update in the future where you can choose the keyboard button that the digital button or switch presses. So that's everything I've got to say about the VelocityOne flight deck. I personally really like it, especially thanks to all the switches, buttons, and dials it comes with, allowing me to really assign all the actions I could want to it. If you have any questions regarding the flight deck, let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. And lastly, if you want to see more flight simulation content, subscribe and consider liking the video if you enjoyed.